I have this theory that the human brain is fundamentally lazy.
Lazy.
Yeah, but I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as a compliment.
Okay.
I think the brain is an aggressive minimalist. It wants to do the absolute least amount of work possible to get the job done. But if you look at how we talk about language, especially in school, you get the exact opposite picture.
I mean, the lists.
Yeah.
The endless lists of exceptions.
Exactly. We're taught that language is this, bloated, messy hoarder's attic.
Right.
You have rules for prepositions, rules for dangling participles, exception A, exception B. It just feels like a chaotic bureaucracy that kept adding red tape for 1,000 years. It's the opposite of minimalism.
It certainly feels that way when you're trying to learn a second language.
Oh, for sure.
It feels like you're just memorizing a distinct, totally arbitrary rule book for every single scenario.
Right. But we are looking at a text today that basically takes a sledgehammer to that entire concept.
I like that, a sledgehammer.
We are diving into Noam Chomsky's Some Notes on Economy of Derivation and Representation. And the argument here is, well, it's wild. Chomsky is saying that the messiness is an illusion. He claims that underneath it all, the language faculty in the brain is actually a perfect, hyper-efficient machine.
It is a massive shift in perspective. And lazy is actually a pretty good starting point, though. In physics or biology, we call it optimal.
Optimal.
You have to realize that for a long, long time, linguistics was basically stamp collecting.
Of collecting.
Yeah. The goal was to find the specific rules for English, then the specific rules for Japanese, and you treat them like totally different species.
Like trying to write a separate instruction manual for every single model of car on the road.
Exactly.
Right.
But the principles and parameters approach, which is just central to this text, it changes the mission objective.
How so?
We aren't looking for the rules of English anymore. We're looking for the invariant system, the biological source code that makes language possible in the first place.
And this is where the text throws the first punch. It argues that rules, in the way we usually think about them, don't actually exist.
That's the core claim. If the principles and parameters approach is right, then within syntax itself, there are no rules for particular languages. There is no Rule 42 of the English language.
Which, that sounds insane, right? I am speaking English right now. I'm following a specific structure, subject, verb, object. If I said the ball kicked I, you'd look at me like I was having a stroke. So I am clearly following rules.
You are following a pattern. But the text argues that the brain isn't consulting a rule book called English.
Okay.
It's running universal grammar, or UG.
UG.
Think of UG as the factory settings, or maybe the BIOS of the human brain. It is an invariant system of principles that every single human is born with.
Okay, so we all ship with the same operating system, but obviously I am not speaking Swahili and I'm not speaking French, so where does the variation come from?
The hardware has switches. These are the parameters. A language like English is just a specific configuration of those switches. You turn switch A on and switch B off, and the output looks like English. You flip them the other way.
And the output looks like Japanese.
Yeah, got it.
So it's not that English has different rules than Japanese, it's that English has different settings in the same menu.
Precisely. And this leads to one of the most difficult but rewarding concepts in the text. Chomsky uses a phrase that usually sends people running for the hills: taxonomic epiphenomena.
I stared at that phrase for a solid 10 minutes. Taxonomic epiphenomena. It sounds like a diagnosis you really don't want to get from your doctor.
It does sound clinically depressed, but let's demystify it. Taxonomy is just classification.
Right.
An epiphenomenon is a side effect, something that appears to be a real thing, but it's actually just a result of other things interacting. So Chomsky is arguing that the things we usually classify as grammatical constructions, like the passive voice or a relative clause, aren't real objects in the brain.
Okay, this is the there is no spoon moment of the text. Because I spent weeks in high school learning the passive voice. You're telling me it's a ghost.
In a structural sense, yes. The brain doesn't have a passive voice module or a passive voice rule. That construction is just what happens when the general principles of universal grammar interact with specific switch settings. It's just a side effect.
I was trying to visualize this, and the best I could come up with is a kaleidoscope.
Ooh, I like that.
When you look through the tube, you see a star pattern. But if you open up the tube, there isn't a little cardboard star inside. There are just mirrors and loose beads.
That is a perfect analogy.
The pattern creates the illusion of a specific object, but the reality is just gravity and reflection.
Exactly. The mirrors are the invariant principles of universal grammar. The beads are the vocabulary.
And the star pattern, you see, that's the passive voice.
That's it. So if you are a linguist trying to write a specific rule for the star pattern, you're wasting your time. You need to understand the angle of the mirrors.
Because if you turn the tube, if you change the parameters, the star disappears and it becomes a square. But the mirrors themselves didn't change.
Precisely. The system is constant, the output is variable. And this brings us to the engine that drives this whole kaleidoscope. If there are no specific rule books, what guides the beads?
This is where Chomsky says the engine runs on a very specific fuel.
Economy.
Economy. Hence the title, Economy of Derivation. This is where my theory about the lazy brain comes back in.
And you're not wrong. The text proposes that we can identify guidelines in the system that act like least effort laws. The system actively legislates against superfluous elements. It is a miser.
It's the Marie Kondo of biology. If it doesn't serve a grammatical purpose, throw it out.
It's ruthless. The source details a principle called full interpretation, or FI.
FI.
This requires that representations must be minimal. Every single element in a sentence must play a role. If an element doesn't have a specific interpretation at the interface levels, if it doesn't contribute to sound or to meaning, it is rejected.
So no junk code. You can't just have a variable hanging around that doesn't do anything.
Right. And then we have the condition called last resort.
Which sounds dramatic, like an action movie title.
It is dramatic in a logical sense. Last resort applies to movement. In many languages, words move around in a sentence to form questions or to emphasize things.
Yeah.
But movement is expensive in this economy. Chomsky argues that things in a sentence only move if they absolutely have to.
So a word is sitting there in the sentence structure, and it's basically saying, I am not moving from this spot unless you force me.
Precisely. Think of it like a toll road. Every time you move a word, you pay a toll. The system wants to save money.
Okay.
For example, the text mentions the chain condition. When a word moves, it creates a chain connecting its original spot to its new spot. The system says, don't build that chain unless it is required to satisfy some other condition.
So the brain is constantly asking,
Is trip necessary?
Yes. It attempts to minimize the length of the derivation. It ensures the path from thought to speech is the shortest possible distance.
Not that.
It's fascinating because it frames language not as some creative explosion, but as a constraint satisfaction problem. It's about finding the cheapest way to connect a thought to a sound.
And that efficiency dictates the very architecture of the machine. The text goes into some detail about what this extended standard theory framework actually looks like.
Right.
Because if we don't have a book of rules, we need some kind of structure for this processing to happen.
It's not magic, it's mechanics. The text breaks down into two main buckets, the lexicon and the computational system.
Think of the lexicon as your parts bin, the list of words you know.
Okay.
The computational system is the assembly line, the engine that puts those parts together. Now, the source specifies that this system has three fundamental levels of representation.
And these are described as interfaces, which I found really helpful. It's where the internal machine talks to the outside world.
Exactly. The text identifies three: D structure, PF, and LF.
Let's run through those because this is the blueprint of the factory. D structure.
D structure connects directly to the lexicon. It's a pure representation of the structural relationships between words before anything starts moving around. It expresses the basic who did what to whom relationships.
Okay, so that's the raw chassis on the assembly line. Then we have PF and LF.
PF stands for phonetic form. This is the interface with the sensorimotor systems. Literally, the instructions for your mouth and lungs to make sound or your hands to sign.
So that's the shipping department. That's where the product leaves the factory.
And LF is logical form. This is the interface with the conceptual systems, the part of the mind that deals with meaning and reasoning and use.
So you grab the pieces at D structure. PF is where it comes out as sound. LS is where it lands as a thought. But the text talks about a middle ground, something called S structure.
S structure is the intersection. The source describes it as the sole point of interaction among the other three levels. But here is the nuance. The text calls S structure a derivative concept.
It compared it to the solution to a set of equations.
That's the key comparison. You don't start with S structure. You don't build it directly. S structure is what happens when you take the raw materials of D structure and apply the principles of the language to satisfy the requirements of sound, PF, and meaning, LF, at the same time.
It's the state the system reaches when everything just balances out.
Exactly.
And how do we get from one level to the other? The text throws out a term that sounds like a superhero team, Affect alpha.
Effect alpha is the ultimate generalization of the idea of a rule. In the old days, you'd have a rule like move the noun to the front. Effect alpha basically says move anything, delete anything, or insert anything.
Whoa, hold on. We just spent 10 minutes talking about how the brain is a minimalist miser, and now you're telling me the core rule is do whatever you want. That sounds like chaos.
It would be chaos. If it weren't for those economy principles we just discussed, this is the tension that makes the system work.
Okay, walk me through that.
Think of effect alpha like a credit card with an infinite limit. You could buy anything. You can move any word anywhere. But last resort, the economy principle, is your frugal accountant standing right next to you.
I see. So the accountant says, yes, you could move that noun, but do you need to? No. Then put it back.
Exactly. The system has the power to do anything, effect alpha, but the economy principles constrain it to only do what is strictly necessary. Its freedom constrained by a budget.
That is such a cool balance. Infinite potential, strictly constrained by efficiency. Now, I want to shift gears to something that honestly blew my mind. We talked about the lexicon, the dictionary. The source implies that this efficiency applies there too.
Absolutely. The text argues that a lexical entry, say the entry for the word hit, should not contain redundant information.
So what counts as redundant?
Well, if the universal system already knows how action verbs work in general, you shouldn't have to write, I have an action verb inside the entry for hit. The entry should only contain what is idiosyncratic, what is unique to that specific word, its specific sound, its specific meaning.
It's like data compression. Don't store data that can be calculated by the algorithm.
That's a great way to put it.
If the system knows that all verbs behave a certain way, you don't need to tag every single verb with that info.
Exactly. And this leads to what is arguably the most provocative sentence in the entire text. I want you to really let this one sink in. Chomsky writes, there is only one human language apart from the lexicon.
There is only one human language that stops you in your tracks. I mean, look around the world. We have Mandarin, Arabic, English, Cherokee. They sound nothing alike. They look nothing alike. How can he justify saying there is only one?
Just follow the engineering logic we've been building. If the computational system, the assembly line engine, is invariant and universal.
Which is the universal grammar part.
Right. And if the parameters, the switches, are just properties attached to specific functional items in the dictionary.
Then the machinery is identical for everyone.
Correct. The only difference between me speaking English and someone speaking Japanese is the vocabulary list and the specific settings attached to those words. The underlying biological organism, the language faculty, is the same.
That's heavy. Yeah. It implies that learning a language isn't learning how to speak. We are born knowing how to speak.
Yes.
Learning a language is just populating the database.
That is the implication. The text suggests that language acquisition is essentially just determining lexical idiosyncrasies. You are figuring out which sound goes with which meaning and which way the switches are flipped for those specific words. The software is already installed and running.
It completely reframes what we are doing when we study linguistics. If there's only one language, are we even studying culture anymore, or are we just studying biology?
In Chomsky's view presented here, it's biology. The text distinguishes between studying texts like recording speech and studying what it calls I-language.
This is a crucial distinction in the paper, I-language versus E-language.
Right. We often think of language as the collection of all the books written in English or all the sentences spoken in New York City today. Chomsky calls that externalized language, or E-language. But the source focuses on I-language.
And the I stands for internalized.
Internalized and intentional. Internalized means we're looking at a state of the mind-brain. We aren't studying the sound waves in the air, we're studying the neural component that generates them. To have a language is to have a specific I-language state in your brain.
It's the difference between studying the sheet music and studying the piano itself.
Or even more physically, it's the difference between studying the song and studying the vocal cords. One is an artifact, the other is an organ.
And intentional.
That's a bit more technical.
Right.
But it essentially means we're interested in the specific procedure or function the brain uses to generate sentences, not just the list of sentences it produces.
So we care about the how, not just the what.
Exactly. The text mentions that even the interfaces, PF for sound and LF for meaning, are internal to the mind-brain, even though they are external to the computational system.
How does that work?
Think of the computational system as the CPU. The monitor, sound, and the hard drive, meaning, are external to the CPU, but they are all still inside the computer case, They're all parts of the biological organism.
I see.
Chomsky is driving home the point that linguistics is ultimately a branch of psychology or even biology. We are studying a biological organ, not a cultural artifact.
So let's zoom out and recap the journey we've been on, because we've covered some serious ground. We started by realizing that language isn't a messy rule book we memorize in school.
Right.
It's a biological machine.
A machine governed by universal grammar.
And this machine is obsessed with efficiency. It follows least effort guidelines, it uses economy of derivation, it deletes junk code via full interpretation,
Right.
and it refuses to move words unless last resort forces it to.
And because of this universal architecture, the differences between languages, what we see as the rules of English or French, are just epiphenomena.
They're side effects.
They are surface-level patterns created by a single invariant system interacting with a specific dictionary.
Which leads to the conclusion that fundamentally there's only one human language. We are all running the exact same operating system, just with different skins.
That is the core message. It shifts our perspective from looking at the differences to looking at the profound unity of the human mind.
It really makes you wonder about communication in general. We spend so much time focusing on language barriers, on how different we are culturally. But this theory suggests that underneath the surface, the cognitive machinery is identical.
It does raise a provocative thought. If the computational system is perfect, efficient, and universal, then the differences between us are much more superficial than we think. If you stripped away the vocabulary, the lexicon, and you reset the switches, my brain and your brain would process information in the exact same way.
We are compatible hardware.
Exactly. It suggests that the Tower of Babel isn't a story about different minds. It's just a story about different dictionaries.
Wow.
The logic, the reason, the structure of thought that is shared, it is universal.
So the barriers aren't in our nature, they're just in our settings.
Precisely.
That is a strangely hopeful place to land after such a dense technical text.
Sometimes the deepest science leads to the simplest human truths.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for helping us unpack this. It's not every day you find out your brain is a lazy genius and that we're all speaking the same language under the hood.
It was a pleasure. Efficiency is a beautiful thing.
And to you listening, thanks for diving deep with us. Next time you struggle to find the right word, just remember, your internal computational system is working perfectly. You're just buffering at the interface. See you on the next deep dive.